Good morning and welcome to our rulemaking workshop on Chapter 5M-1. I am Kathleen Greenwood and I work for the Office of Agricultural Water Policy in the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Thank you for attending our meeting. We have been looking forward to this, and I am going to go ahead and give you a preview of the agenda. First, we will go over introductions and an overview of the GoToWebinar instructions. Then Stephen James will present information on our Chapter 120 Florida statute and the administrative rulemaking process. Then our director, Christopher Pettit, will give a presentation of proposed changes. And then after that, we will have public comment, and our public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per commenter. And we will wrap everything up with concluding thoughts and our next steps for this rulemaking effort. I just want to start off here with a brief overview. Excuse me while I change my screens for a minute. A brief overview of how to use the attendee controls and how things will run within the webinar today. So I do want to note that this is a rulemaking workshop and we are recording it. All attendees will be given a link to view the webinar afterwards. That's all I have to say about that. So the important thing to know where all your controls are is this control panel right here on your screen. This arrow can open it and close it. So if it's closed, you will just have, excuse me. Oops. If you close the webinar, if you close your control panel, you will just have this small bar and all of this other stuff will be hidden. Your microphone is here and all the attendees have joined the webinar as muted. We have quite a few people signed up. We have over 140 people registered, so that's why you have joined muted. During the public comment period, you will be given the opportunity to speak, so I will unmute you. We have several presenters during this workshop, and when we switch presenters, this screen here will pop up, and don't worry, you haven't been kicked out of the webinar. So let me go back here. We have a raise your hand feature on the control panel, and that's to get our attention. And when I see that during the public comment period, then you will be unmuted to share your public comments with the group, and I will take you in the order that your hand is raised. So please don't worry, we will get to you. As I mentioned, we do have quite a few participants today. If you have a question for me during the presentation, you may type that in your question and chat box, and as applicable, we can answer it at that time. Additionally, you may use the question or chat box for providing your public comments. We will keep a record of that, so we will have those public comments afterwards if you don't have audio access or you prefer not to speak out loud to the group. And then lastly, hopefully you're hearing me. We have the choice of computer audio, or you can call in. Sometimes people will find that their computer audio does not work at any time during the meeting. If you need to switch to phone call, just go ahead and select this radio button. You will be given the call-in information at that time. Or if you're on a phone and you're having a problem and want to switch to the computer, you may do that too. And with that is all of our presentation. Staff that is present today from our office, as I mentioned, is Christopher Pettit, who is the Director of the Office of Ag Water Policy. Our counsel is Stephen James, and then we also have Bill Bartnick, who is an environmental administrator within our group. And with that, I will turn it over to Stephen James.
Kathleen, this is Chris. Everybody, Christopher Pettit, Director of Office of Agricultural Water Policy. We are going to kick it to Stephen here in just a minute. Thank you, Kathleen, for administrating and facilitating this rule workshop. Good morning, everybody. We're so happy to have the interest and attendance in what is a very important rulemaking for us as we go and implement the provisions of Senate Bill 712 and some other things that we need to get done administratively for our office. I am going to attempt to share my screen. If anything goes wrong, it's obviously operator error. Let's see. Kathleen, can you enable it so I can share my screen? Thank you. Let's see. All right. I believe everybody can see my screen, and I am going to start this slideshow from the beginning. And I always, because of my display settings, have to do a little switcho changeo here. And as Kathleen stated, we are going ahead and getting this rulemaking going. Thank you for joining us in this extraordinary time of COVID on GoToWebinar. It's usually nice to see everybody's faces. However, we are doing what we can in a virtual environment. So we want to make this as efficient and effective as possible. As Kathleen mentioned, we are going to go ahead and facilitate public comment. That will be later in the meeting. What we would ask you to do is, if you are interested in making a comment, you can do it one of two ways. In the chat box, you can go ahead and note that you're interested in providing public comment later, and Kathleen will be tracking that. Alternatively, at the end of the meeting, we will allow the opportunity for folks to raise their hands and make public comment that way. Additionally, as we move through the webinar, you do have myself, Mr. James, and Mr. Bartnick here. We would ask, if there is a question that arises or a point of clarity that would let you're looking for, we would ask you to put that question in the chat, and if need be, Kathleen can wave a big bright flag in front of me so I know that it's there, and we will address it as we move through the overview of the rulemaking. As noted, I am going to turn it over in very short order to Mr. James to talk about the 120 process, where we're at, and kind of set the table. We will be asking for written comments for a period after this meeting, and look forward again to getting them. We've already gotten a few, so we appreciate everybody's interest and input. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Mr. James, let him run through kind of where we're at in the process and the way in which 120 operates, and then I will dive into the details and look forward to chatting with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Can you hear me? I was muted. Are we good?
We got you, Stephen.
Okay. So essentially, under 120, we are in the first stage there. We are in the notice of rule development stage. And under 12054, when the legislature enacts a law that requires us to implement that act by rule, there's a deadline. and that deadline is November 1st of each year. So we did file this notice of rule development. I think it was on October 16th to comply with that provision. This is, as I said, the first step in the rulemaking process. Workshops, which this is today, don't have to be scheduled at that time, but if you do, you have to kind of give 14-day notice for the workshop. And we thought it prudent to do so with our notice to say, you know, we're going to have a workshop and we're going to give everybody an opportunity to see what is proposed and to have questions or comments on what we propose. After that, we will go into the second phase, which is a notice of proposed rule. And on the notice of proposed rule, which we will have to file in a couple places, we'll file with the Joint Administrative Procedures Committee 21 days before that. And for those not familiar with JAPC, they just take a look and see if, you know, there's any problems with the rule, invalid exercise of legislative authority, the rules in the proper form, notice was sufficient, there's proper legislative intent, those sorts of things. Give it a quick once over, and then it goes into the notice of proposed rule, which has to be filed 28 days before that. And after that, you will have another opportunity to comment. Hearings can be requested. There's a deadline of 28 days there, and that gives the stakeholders another opportunity to participate in the process. So at all times, we want to make sure that we provide, you know, the rule is available for inspection and for copying, and everybody has it. So that's why we're going through it today. It has not been submitted, so it is going to be reviewed today, and we'll take your comments on that as we go forward. There's also in the notice a person to be contacted is required, and that person is Bill Bartnick, and his number is in the notice to respond to any questions that you may have subsequent to today. And his number is listed in the notice, which is 850-617-1705. And that's kind of a short briefing on the 120 process, Chris.
Thank you, Stephen. With that, I just wanted to get back into the substance of kind of where we're at, where we're headed. As I noted, a large piece of this rulemaking is to get us in compliance with the recently adopted language in Senate Bill 712, which made some changes into the way in which our programs operate. What I'm going to do now is kind of walk through the statutory language of 712, the requirements that are there, and then kind of how we have responded and been implementing, because that law went into effect July the 1st of this year. And then from there, I'm going to jump into another document that has the rule language, that has the forms that we're going to incorporate by reference, and kind of talk through what we're doing and how we're handling that within the rule and then within the associated documents. So with that, there is new statutory language in 403-067 Florida statutes. That is the section of Florida statutes that deals with TMDLs, BMAPs, and the tripartite alliance, the cooperative agency framework that exists between the water management districts, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services through my office, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. The new language essentially sets out three different pieces back in 2016, there were changes to the legislation, same section, that took us to an implementation verification framework where after a producer enrolls in the best management practice program, the applicable best management practices for the parcel based on the manual in which they're enrolled are determined. Producer goes and implements those as they undertake production on the landscape. There was a requirement that implementation verification take place, and this statutory language indicates that we have a requirement to perform those on-site inspections every 2 years for folks who are enrolled in the BMP program to verify that the BMPs are being properly implemented. During that IB visit, we are collecting and reviewing documentation required by rules adopted pursuant to subparagraph C2. Those are read our BMP manuals that are adopted by rule. That includes but not limited those nutrient records that are required to demonstrate compliance on the first part, but also allow us to look at the nitrogen and phosphorus that is being applied to the landscape. There is additional requirements that were put on our office that in reaching this 2-year goal, we are looking to make sure that we also prioritize looking at producers in BMAPs for Lake Okeechobee, Indian River Lagoon, Caloosahatchee River Estuary, and Silver Springs. As we collect and retain the records regarding nitrogen and phosphorus application on the landscape, we are required to then work with our partners at the Department of Environmental Protection to provide information that's obtained from those visits for the purposes of processes that operate under the BMAP context. So, in sum, we have an IB site visit that is required for all enrolled producers at least every 2 years. And the legislature was kind enough to provide us with 8 additional full-time employee positions to make sure that we are getting on the ground and meeting that statutory requirement. When we're on the IB, there's documentation that is required to be provided that demonstrates the proper implementation of applicable BMPs. Now, those BMPs, just to remind everybody, you've got nutrient management, irrigation management, and water resource management BMPs targeted at making sure that we are as efficient as possible in balancing production with water resource protection. And the metaphor I continue to use is, if you've got a bowl that's filling up, we want to make sure that the drops tied to agriculture that are impacting that bowl in the form of anthropogenic impacts, we want to make sure that those drops are as small as possible. Thirdly, there are then records that are required to be retained by the Office of Agricultural Water Policy through our BMP programs. That is the nitrogen, phosphorus, fertilizer application records that serve to quantify the amount of nutrients applied on an enrolled parcel. And with that, we've adopted something called the Nutrient Application Record Form, which everybody is referring to as the NARF, which I'm still uncomfortable about, but NARF it is, and the associated rule amendments that we're about to talk about. Nutrient information that is gleaned from the application records that we're collecting is then provided to the Department of Environmental Protection for utilization within the BMAP assessment process, and that iterative framework where you've got the 3 agencies working together to take a look at these landscapes and make sure that we're all implementing programs that result in improvement on the landscape. This is the nutrient application record form. You will see it again. I just wanted to put this up. This is the form that we went to our forms committee here at DAX knowing that we had to get the rule in place. We knew that we've got 9 very unique, complex manuals based on commodities that are being produced on the landscape. We have a myriad of different production techniques and things that are happening that necessarily require different ways of keeping records. And we needed to make sure that for the purposes of simplifying, for the purposes of making sure that we're getting that vital information that we need, we wanted to be very, very clear in what we're asking for and the type of data that we are collecting. So we went ahead and have been utilizing this form in those implementation verification visits that have been undertaken. It has been a very quality experience because it has allowed us, I've described it as a cold open in restaurant terms, to be able to get out and see the complexities, see the issues that are going to arise. It does team very well with the fact that we're updating our BMP manuals, and we'll be able to talk about these idiosyncrasies as we move through that process. However, and you'll see this again in just a short while, what we're trying to get at is the timing that nutrient application occurs. We're trying to get at the manual that's being, that folks are enrolled under. If there is multiple commodities being grown under a manual, such as specialty fruit and nut or vegetable and agronomic crops, we're looking at the commodities being grown, the nutrient source being utilized, and ultimately the pounds of nitrogen being applied, or the pounds of phosphorus, P2O5, being applied across the production acreage. And that gives you a pretty good idea of how to kind of get to the aggregate numbers of the nitrogen and phosphorus that is being applied to the geographic landscape within a basin or sub-basin pursuant to a basin management action plan. With that, I am going to switch a couple things here and move into the rule language. This is the notice of rule development that went out. I am not going to belabor a lot of this. Again, if there are questions that arise as I'm moving through, please go ahead and populate those in the chat box. If there's anything that I'm unclear on, please go ahead and speak to that as well. Happy to, again, take comments at the end of the meeting. So here is, as Stephen James mentioned, this is Mr. Bartnick. This is Mr. Bartnick's office number. This is Mr. Bartnick's email. This is where the comments are going to be directed, and you will see this email again at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. In terms of the rule, and forgive me, I'm actually going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation quickly. There's one additional slide I wanted to pop up just to kind of let everybody see what we are doing. We are going to essentially change 3 pieces of this rule chapter. There is an update that is needed to the definitions of the notice of intent to enroll in best management practices, as well as a definition of enrollment. That is happening because there have been a couple of things that have occurred statewide that alerted us to some clarity that was needed to define when enrollment actually took place in the BMP program. And it's important to note that the process exists that within BMAPs, you're either enrolling or you are undertaking water quality monitoring to demonstrate that there is not a cause or contribution to water quality impairment. And we needed to establish clarity in demonstrating that producers do let us know, they tell us through their notices that they intend to be enrolled in the program. And enrollment itself then occurs once the applicable BMPs are identified pursuant to site visit and communication between the producer and OAWP staff to make sure that we have a very clear idea. This is what the landscape looks like. This is the way in which you are proposing to undertake production. These are the applicable BMPs pursuant to the manual in which you're enrolling. And this is how we are balancing production with water resource protection on the landscape. And then I do a presentation, and I'm happy to have an offline conversation about the manuals and how that interacts, and the checklists and whatnot. We can make things available, and we'll be updating our website. But for the purposes of this rulemaking, we needed to go ahead and provide clarity as to how does a producer provide that notice that they intend to get involved in the program. Then how does enrollment, in terms of the regulatory and compliance piece, how do we set that foundation from which we are going to do our implementation verification visits to verify proper implementation of those applicable BMPs. We have also adopted a general notice of intent form to enroll in the BMPs, and that form is also part of this rulemaking. The second piece of the rule is really the piece that is looking at Senate Bill 712, the requirements that were in that language, and making sure that the text of Chapter 5M1 is consistent with the language that was utilized in the legislation, and that we need to be implementing. That includes collection and review. That includes collection and retention. That includes the meat, the nuts and bolts of where 712 is asking us to go. 5M1009 is implementation assistance. That needed to be updated again for consistency with 712. However, there are additional changes that also we looked at making to get us better in sequence in terms of the time frames, to make sure that when corrective or remedial action measures are necessary on the landscape, we understand how that operates, we understand the time frames within which things need to be completed, and how ultimately, based on if for some reason someone is not able to reach proper implementation of a BMP, at what point are we going ahead and turning to the Department of Environmental Protection and saying, there is a compliance issue here that now is a water quality issue because the presumption of compliance cannot be provided based on a lack of proper implementation. How do we then get these cases to the Department of Environmental Protection for the exercise of their general compliance authority? So with that, I will go ahead and back off that general and pop back into the rule language. Again, 5M1001, applicable best management practices. Again, those are the ones that are identified. That's when you're undertaking that site visit, when you're meeting with the producer, when you're taking a look at the water resources on the landscape, the type of production, intensity, density of production. That's when you are identifying, based on the manuals that have been adopted and verified by the Department of Environmental Protection. How are we making sure that we're getting to where we need to be within an enrollment? The big changes that are made, again, we are making changes to subparagraph 5, subparagraph 7, which deal with enrollment and the notice of intent. And the changes really spell out, you can file a notice of intent, you're going to enroll, you're going to properly implement the BMPs in accordance with the manual that you are going to be enrolled under. You have the incorporation of the general NOI form, and again, based on resources, communication with DEP, just functional running of a governance program. We also wanted to make sure that if a producer or landowner submits an NOI, they end up going on a list. We go ahead and dedicate our resources to get our programs implemented. We notify folks that a site visit is imminent, is going to take place, to be able to determine those applicable BMPs. If we notify somebody and for whatever reason there's an occurrence where folks are just not signing up, we are going to take those steps again to notify the Department of Environmental Protection regarding the lack of enrollment. So that said, we also wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a case where a landowner producer indicates that they wanted to enroll, we hadn't gotten to them yet. They obviously clearly want to be part of our regulatory program, but we didn't want them to be identified as not being enrolled, not wanting to enroll if they have clearly indicated intent. The definition of enrollment, therefore, is updated to clearly state that the applicable BMPs are not identified until there is OAWP staff involvement, that the department representatives meet and operate with the producer to identify those applicable BMPs and needs for the site, and that we also have adopted a rule recently that provides for folks to be identified as a temporarily inactive operation. That is also considered an enrollment if you are temporarily inactive. With that, I'm also going to move on to 5M1008, which is the implementation verification section. Consistent with the requirements of Senate Bill 712, we are mimicking that language. The department is obligated and will be conducting a site visit at least every 2 years to verify the proper implementation of the applicable BMPs for enrolled producers. We do make sure for those instances where you have somebody leasing on the property, we make sure that the landowner is aware of the enrollment of the applicable BMPs that are expected to be undertaken on the site, as well as, not that it's relevant to this rulemaking, but we also notify them of any cost share that is occurring on the property. Again, we have the need to implement our programs efficiently and effectively. We want to make sure that as producers or landowners are notified that a site visit for implementation verification purposes is needed to occur, given that we have to hit everybody every 2 years. We are undertaking the necessary outreach to make sure that folks are contacted and that we try and set up a site visit. However, if we struggle and get to that 60-day mark, we are looking to notify the department that folks have not, in good faith, gone to undertake that site visit where we can verify that the BMPs have been properly implemented. During the implementation verification site visit, we are going to make sure that we collect and review any records required by the manual under which the property is enrolled. That is consistent with existing compliance frameworks that have been in place, arguably at least since 2016. That's the implementation verification framework. But even prior to that, these are the records that we look at to make sure that you're being as efficient as possible in your irrigation. We look at them to make sure that the nutrient application that is taking place on site is in compliance with existing standards and is justified, that demonstrates the efficiency in the way in which nutrients are applied. So this drives to the manuals, and you go back to the cattle manual, you go back to the citrus manual, you go back to the requirements therein. We then go ahead and look at the documentation that provides that you're properly implementing the applicable BMPs. 3 is the collect and retain. So we will be walking away with the records that regard the application of nitrogen and phosphorus on the enrolled parcel. That's going to be done through the development and utilization of the nutrient application record form, which is our template. This is the way in which we have to, given the myriad of different record keeping requirements and necessities based on the complexity of the commodities that are being produced across the landscape, we needed to make sure that we were being very clear about what data was necessary to get that information, that then we can adequately and efficiently interact with our agency partners at DEP within that BMAP context. So what we're looking at is making sure that we can take records that are being kept for nurseries, records being kept for citrus, records that are being kept for a variety of agronomic crops, vegetables, and get the data that's needed. So we are looking at a template that can be utilized in the form of the nutrient application record form, which helps us establish exactly what we need, or a substantially similar form record that is going to provide us with the manual in which somebody's enrolled, the time period within which nutrient application occurred, types of nutrients utilized, total amount of nitrogen applied in pounds over the production acreage, total amount of phosphorus and PO2O5 applied in pounds across the acreage, and then what that acreage is. The remainder of the changes, as you can see, are technical in nature in 5M1008. 5M1009, again, is to make sure that we are consistent with the language of 712, which is why you see instead of full implementation, it's proper implementation given the statutory nomenclature. We are establishing, based on the 2-year period, that the time frames for completion of corrective measures aren't going to extend beyond the date of the next ID visit. So in that case, if there is a corrective measure, it can range from anything, records could be needing some adjustment, needing some clarification to be able to provide us the information that we need to be able to undertake that analysis of proper implementation. If that's the case, we can identify a time frame much less than that 2-year period. That being said, if there's a water resource type of a challenge that we've seen in many projects where permitting for some of these projects takes a significant amount of time, particularly if there is, say, a 404 component. At that point, the corrective measures that would be identified may tie to a much longer type of a time frame based on other regulatory pieces that we don't necessarily, is not necessarily conducive to the way in which, what we can control, I suppose I'll put it. We're also making changes to the remedial measures, the existing rule, and again, making sure that we are consistent with the timeframes that are out there. I know that there's been a couple of questions. I see Chris Costello, shout out from Sarasota. Nice to see you, Chris. But the changes from full to proper is to be in compliance with the statute and the language of the law. Proper implementation covers the implementation of all the applicable BMPs. So in order to be properly implementing a BMP, it has to be implemented to its fullest extent. So we want to make sure that we're going ahead and doing that. Got another question about the NARF being required for each individual field. The NARF is subject to the notice of intent. And the way in which the notice of intents operate is that they're applicable to a variety of different scenarios. The NOIs include a production area. We call it Mr. Peanut because we're trying to get much more accurate in the way in which we are identifying where agricultural production is occurring on the landscape. And the NARF is applicable to applications that are taking place based on production that is occurring on that NOI landscape. So we are looking at getting the information that the NARF itself is going to be populated by nutrient applications that occur within that NOI. And that's the way that we're looking at that. Moving on, actually I saw one more question I'll address really quickly. Nutrient information. It's outside the scope of this rulemaking. However, we have been in very close communication with our partners at DEP to determine the best way in which we can provide them the aggregate nitrogen and phosphorus application information within the BMAP context. And that that communication continues. They utilize it within the BMAPs as well as the STAR report, which is their update on an annual basis that kind of matches our annual report. We've been asked by a number of different folks, including the legislature, and communicate with DEP themselves, that consistency and consistent timing and reporting is important. We look at things on an annual basis by calendar year. So that is part of the reason why you see the outlay that exists on the nutrient application record form. So that is the extent of the rule language, relatively straightforward. We are implementing this new notice of intent general form to be utilized. Again, consistency, efficiency, making sure that there's clear expectations, not only for interested stakeholders, also for the regulated producer community, and our communication with the state agencies where we may have overlap in permitting programs. So this is a very straightforward checklist. We want to get all the information that we need. We want to make sure that we're identifying the right manual. There are circumstances in which either through the district's 40E63 program or through a variety of NPDES permits that are issued for parcels, that we want to make sure that we're very clear on our area of jurisdictional authority as opposed to another agency's area of jurisdictional authority. And we already have in rule that if you are enrolled and permitted by another permitting agency, we render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and make sure that if folks come to us and say, hey, we're covered by a 40E63 permit, it is permitted through the Water Management District in South Florida, we go ahead and say, okay, is the entirety of the parcel covered by the permit? Yes. All right, that is sufficient to signify enrollment in our programs, and the inspections and whatnot, everything that goes with 40E63, therefore kind of resides in the regulatory authority that is the South Florida Water Management District. The NPDES framework, dairies and the type of waste systems that are permitted by DEP, there's oftentimes other components of those dairies that fall within our program. So we want to make sure that we are having eyes undertaking our compliance responsibilities for those areas that fall within our program and need the applicable BMPs and the IBs, and then leaving to the other jurisdictional authorities their areas of expertise and jurisdictional oversight. We would ask you to take a look at this form. Again, pretty consistent with things that have already been in the manuals. What we are looking to do is be more efficient, more effective in the way in which we operate. And you will also note, again, I'll just put it here, we utilize both full-time staff. We also utilize our contracts and relationships with conservation districts through our BMP technicians to make sure that folks get enrolled. So we are requiring, we need to make sure that folks are getting enrolled and communicating with us. So we are identifying the staff member and having them identified as who was the person that undertook that enrollment responsibility. Moving on, this is a familiar face. We did walk through here. I'm going to just pop this up for just a second and then kind of talk through the producer instructions that are tied to this form, because I do believe that walking through those instructions is going to be helpful in kind of talking about where we're going. This form is intended to be in the first iteration over the next 2 years. We do anticipate folks utilizing it in paper form, however, subject to technical constraints and some issues within the rural environment as it relates to availability of broadband, et cetera, et cetera. We are intending that ultimately this be something that is utilized electronically, and we get into a very efficient, effective process where we are working to provide the technical tools. And again, we're going to look at it manual by manual. We're going to look at existing providers of software that folks use for record keeping currently. Ultimately, where we would like to get to is to a point where we're able to work with the producer, get this information readily available, provided to us. We would retain it based on the attestation of the producer, as well as the auditing of the underlying data for compliance purposes that help support these forms. We will then go ahead and make sure that that is in a database in a form that we can do our queries and go ahead and push that information in the context of the BMAP process to the Department of Environmental Protection. Again, to kind of walk through what we're meaning here, and we are taking comments on this underlined portion, and it's based on some really interesting experience that we're having in the field. The NOI number, very straightforward. What is the NOI? How is it being being implemented? What is the shape that is associated with it? In many cases, we have come upon situations where producers have not applied fertilizer over the previous 2-year period. We go ahead and provide the opportunity for a producer to indicate that. As part of the IV visit, we are then looking at all the records, looking at everything that exists on the landscape, doing our site visit, et cetera, making sure that as part of that audit, we are verifying that everything's being properly implemented, and that those fertilizers aren't being applied. If you are applying nutrients through fertilizer or another nutrient source, we're looking at the month and year or months and year of each application of fertilizer or that nutrient source. And the language that we're looking at currently, based on getting out and looking at the way in which fertilizer is purchased, the way in which nutrient sources are aggregated on site or utilized, we have found that particularly in certain circumstances, the way in which the data exists in terms of the records through the manual is on by either application period of that nutrient source or by growing season. And it is going to be subject to the uniqueness of each individual commodity through the manuals. However, we wanted to look at providing the opportunity to provide this data in aggregate by application period or growing season in intervals of up to 6 months. And to give an example, you're growing cotton and you're applying from January through March, and it's at a relatively consistent rate. You've got the underlying records that my staff looks at for compliance purposes. For these reporting purposes, what we're getting at, again, is aggregate on a landscape. So if there's a situation in which the numbers are provided in aggregate in intervals up to 6 months within the calendar year, and again, calendar year is the way in which we look at things on the BMAP basis, and frankly on our reporting basis. The records documenting the underlying amounts have to be available for inspection so that we can verify, and we do our audit through my office. However, in terms of reporting with consistency with existing records, application period and growing season, those intervals, in many cases, we are finding to be more appropriate to get to that aggregate number. The BMP manual that we're looking at is any of the 9 manuals that we have. We have 2 additional in development that we will talk about as they come online and end up moving forward. However, right now everybody is getting enrolled in one of these 9 manuals, and we want to identify where that is. Within the commodity grown, we have 2 manuals in the vegetable and agronomic crop and specialty fruit and nut manuals that obviously include more than one commodity. In that, I believe we have 300 and something in the state that are being produced currently, which is a large number. So we want to make sure that we know what manual folks are in and then what commodity is being utilized. The nutrient source, we kind of looked at analysis versus no analysis. which we have book values based on research for a number of sources. So, we look at, again, it goes to the individual manual. I mean, you look at the various manuals that we have, and the way in which nutrients are utilized as a result of production practices are contained within that manual. So we look at, all right, you've got commercial fertilizer, that's going to come with a guaranteed analysis. Class AA biosolids, that comes with an analysis. We encourage, whatever nutrient source within the manuals, we encourage folks, we're viable to go ahead and look at an analysis. Folks tend to look at getting a lab in certain cases to provide that lab analysis. So in any cases where there's an other, and then you've got composted material, which has a very quality set book value. Manure has a set book value. There are other sources. Poultry litter is the one that we utilize. Floor sweepings. So we're asking folks to kind of identify what that nutrient source is. They then are able to utilize either the analysis that then leads to the determination of the pounds of nitrogen, pounds of phosphorus applied, or you're using the book values to get to that same number. So ultimately, you are looking at pounds of nitrogen that are being applied across a production landscape, pounds of phosphorus, and the way in which for those that are outside the agricultural arena, the way in which it's reported is in the form of P2O5, and then we have a formula that we apply to it that then helps us get to that total pounds of phosphorus number on the NOI. We're giving instructions and indication as to the utilization of the guaranteed analysis. And book values, we've got technical assistance that we provide. There's a lot of literature out there. We provide an example of the way in which you would do the analysis if you were utilizing broiler, poultry, and manure to be able to get at that balance. And again, this is targeted at determining and getting in the data that equates to the nitrogen and phosphorus being applied to the landscape. The manuals are then what drive the audit and the analysis undertaken by our staff is what drives the collect and review and the compliance piece of the program. I see another couple questions coming in, and I'm almost through this document. So again, we do remind folks that you still have to do a NARF if no fertilizer or nutrient source is applied during the last 2-year period, but it is an indication that they aren't. Hold on just a second. I saw a couple of questions. There was a question about the electronic form. We do have the electronic form in Excel, and field staff has the ability to provide that form. We are also, again, looking at technical insight and assistance tools to be able to integrate what we need out of that form into existing record keeping kind of situations where folks are using third-party software or whatnot to go ahead and keep their nutrient records. Thank you for the question, by the way. Let's see. David Cullen has a question. I'm trying to get through it. I'm sorry. Does the requirement that the same BMPs be used on the ore sets, parcels maybe, extend to their being used on the parcels at the same time to temporarily valid parcels be included in the lower average energy per acre? We're looking at the nutrient application. Again, David, there's your collect and review piece, which is the compliance with application as it exists where the nutrients are being applied. The collect and retain piece of the program and the nutrient application record form is driven towards getting the aggregate number that is being applied across a landscape which then is being utilized within the context of a BMAP, within a basin or a sub-basin. So the language of 712 has two different pieces to it. It's got the implementation, verification, compliance, making sure that folks are in compliance with the BMP manuals, collect and review of that documentation to demonstrate proper implementation. And then there's the collect and retention of nutrient data that is then utilized to aggregate the information to be shared with our agency partner at DEP to inform nutrients on the landscape in a BMAP context. I guess that's the way I'll answer that. Is the option to aggregate in addition to or instead of the application? It's an either or. If someone is buying bulk fertilizer for a 3-month period to fertilize peanuts, and it is over that period, and the receipt that we would be looking at is the fertilizer that was purchased, and then on site you're verifying the various applications. Then in terms of efficiency and clarity, it is easy to then look at that receipt based on the compliance audit and say that that receipt is indicative, and the reporting based on that is indicative of what is being applied over a growing season. And again, it goes back to the way in which nutrient sources are purchased and brought on and then applied across the landscape. So we continue to try and get at again that aggregate data of what is actively happening, so that it can be considered. And again, there's within the BMAP context, there's lots of things to consider. Your efficiency, uptake rates, your what's leaving the property in export, yield data, all kinds of different stuff that we can look at within that talks about that overarching nutrient framework. But for these purposes, per the language of the legislation, we want to get at just that aggregate number of what in terms of pounds of N and pounds of P is being applied. Why are applicable BMPs not defined within rulemaking? Applicable BMPs are defined within the language of the rule. I'll go up to the back up to the top here. And the applicable BMPs are going to be those that are applicable to the landscape of a subject parcel that is enrolled based on the manual in which it is enrolled, and based on the the way in which production is taking place. So the applicable BMPs again push back to those that are identified, established, and then verified through the vegetable and agronomic crop manual or the cattle manual. So those BMPs have undergone that analysis, and then when we're on site, you're identifying those applicable BMPs, and your choices are either they are already in use, they are going to be planned, and there's a time frame for putting them in use, or they are not applicable to the landscape. So if you're not irrigating, the irrigation BMPs would be not applicable. Let's see, there's a couple of questions outside the context of the rulemaking. We exist under the statute that we're in, which is 403-067, which is that TMDL BMAP context. And let's see. Chris Costello is asking this one, and then there's another question about the either or option. Again, I think I answered this partially. A lot of this is based on the way in which nutrients are purchased and fertilizers purchased, and the way in which folks are getting those nutrient inputs to the, on site to be able to be applied. So again, the target is to collect information about the amount of nutrients that are being applied in aggregate across the landscape, to be able to identify, again, on a BMAP basin, sub-basin level, what are those inputs that then we have other conversations about BMPs, cost share, other things that are occurring with DEP as part of that BMAP conversation. So what we're looking to get at is the most effective way to get the information. And in many cases, again, folks are purchasing that fertilizer for application over a several month period, and it may be apt and appropriate to go ahead and look at the underlying record and say, okay, we understand for compliance purposes, this, that, and the other. However, for reporting purposes, you purchased the fertilizer January 1st. It was applied over a 3-month period, but the aggregate total doesn't change, and that's the data that we're targeting. All right. I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat box, having walked through the rule. And again, we're at 10 o'clock now. Kathleen says we have a lot more. All right, Kathleen. Well, I don't know whether we want to print them in the chat box or how you want to handle. I will turn it over to you as a.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, several people had asked that the questions be read out loud. So I'll just go ahead and go through them, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, from Pam Way. Pam asked, will pounds of nitrogen and P2O5 be reported as planted acres or field acres or total acres of commodity?
Well, we're looking at we're looking at the production acreage under the notice of intent. So, we in the course of the year and a half plus that we've been here, we've gone from parcel acres to something much more precise in terms of a GIS coverage of where agricultural production is actually occurring within an NOI. So the answer to that is it's going to be acreage that is identified within that notice of intent number, that within that enrollment, that reflects the acreage that is being produced. So you're going to look at that NOI and the geographic coverage of it, and then there's going to be a total pounds of nitrogen, total pounds of phosphorus that has been applied over that previous 2-year period for that acreage. Next question.
Okay, from Deb Broughton, a grower question says, provide all examples of documentation to justify needed supplemental nitrogen treatments to maintain a healthy crop over the IFAS rate. So I guess they are asking if you can provide some examples of what type of documentation would be needed.
Well, I would say that's outside, again, it's outside the scope of this rulemaking. That's a manual question, and that's a compliance question within the requirements of the manual. So happy to to kind of take that question kind of offline within the IB context, within the context of the manuals, because again, for the purposes of this workshop, we're talking about the way in which we're looking to incorporate forms to detail the aggregate amount over the landscape in terms of the nutrient data that we're going to be providing to the Department of Environmental Protection.
Okay.
Next question.
Thank you. From Beth Lewis, we have a couple of questions. Ms. Lewis is asking, could you provide more detail on why the 6-month time frame was selected in the NERF instructions? And her,
Yes, I'll answer that question first. We looked
Okay.
across the manuals at the various application periods and growing seasons that were associated with a variety of different types of production. And 6 months was kind of the Goldilocks zone. That's not to say that we don't have, there are cases in which the growing period would be less than that, which is why the up to language is there. There are perennial kind of crops that are grown annually. However, there are a variety of application periods that take place. So the 6-month number was to us, and technically, and I don't know if Bill wants to chime in here at all, but to our technical review, that 6-month number was the kind of the happy period where, be it growing season, be it application period, we were able to cover the majority of the situations in which up to that 6-month period, we would be able to cover that application period or growing season. Next question.
Again, from Ms. Lewis, she states that producers may opt to provide total application amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus aggregated by application period or growing season in intervals of up to 6 months within the calendar year.
That is that is
Okay.
what is being proposed at at present.
Okay. The next question is from Elizabeth Malik. If a cropping season runs from August to May, can we submit 1 NARF per season per location, or do we need to submit a separate second form for the following year? For example, our 2021 growing season starts in August 2020 and ends in May 2021. Can we submit 1 form, or do we need to submit 2, 1 for each calendar year?
Well, you're only going to, thank you, Beth, for that question, by the way. The nutrient application record form is going to be submitted once. It will be submitted as a product of the implementation verification site visit that is being performed every 2 years. On that nutrient application record form, there would need to be noted the application dates, periods that reflect the nutrients being applied to the landscape. Now, tied to the questions that Beth just asked, for the purposes of the line items under the NARF, if you had a growing season from August to May, you would be able to look at August through December of 2020 as 1 entry. You would note you were growing from August through December, and then the total amounts tied to that, as well as then a separate entity for the January through May period of 2021. The reason that we need to do that is, again, the issue is that when we're working with our partners at DEP, we deal with information on a calendar year basis, and we need to have the ability to manage our database to be able to pull data and know what was applied within a given calendar year.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Buddy Strickland, and Buddy asked for clarification. The wording of the landscape includes both soil applied and foliar applied nitrogen and phosphorus.
I'm sorry, repeat that, Kathleen.
Buddy was asking about I guess the wording in the rule regarding landscape, I guess landscape application maybe include, and they want to know if it includes both soil applied and foliar applied nitrogen and phosphorus.
This ties back to, again, this all drives back to the manuals, and you know, the manuals themselves require you know, the detailing of each nutrient application, and it's in a variety of different languages within the manuals themselves. So what we are getting at, again, for the purposes of this form, is if you are applying you know, a nutrient source to the landscape, you know, what is the for production purposes, what's the, you know, what are the amounts that then are being applied in total pounds of N, total pounds of phosphorus. So it is, you know, per the manuals that have been adopted and existed for some time, you know, it is any nutrient source.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have a question about compost and from Darren Midland.
Yeah,
Darren,
I read that one, Kathleen. I mean, the compost piece. You know, again, compost is a nutrient source that's being applied to the landscape. It is something that you know, is, I'll take it in the poultry litter context. We look at that balance between maintenance of soil health, which is a very key component of our compliance program, and then making sure that we look at, again, for the purposes of production, you know, the nutrients that you know, that are being you know, that are being applied to the landscape. So the specifics of the question in terms of the way in which the composting occurs, and we've got a variety of you know, different ways in which that operates. Again, that is something that operates within a BMP manual context, and I would direct it to the you know, to the manual, and we can, depending upon what's ongoing in the landscape, we're more than happy to have that offline discussion. And I know that Bill can you know, Bill can have a conversation with them and talk about the nuances as it relates to the regulatory compliance piece of the program.
okay, thank you. And we have one last question from Stuart Swanson. They ask, green beans can be harvested after 50 days if an NOI does not result in enrollment until a site visit is conducted. Won't that result in leased land with short season crops not being enrolled?
Well, that is a communication, you know, again, a communication and resource dedication issue in that the law is quite clear. You know, for producers within basin management action plans, the enrollment is required in the applicable BMPs, and again, the BMPs have to be applicable and they have to be properly implemented, which means that interaction with my folks and the OAWP program is required to make sure that, again, the applicable BMPs are being implemented, and they're being implemented properly. As is noted, we've got commodities that exist in a variety of different frameworks, and again, you know, as we do the enrollments, as we do the IV visits, we work very, very closely with our producer partners to make sure that we are capturing what is occurring on the landscape. And again, it's one of those that, you know, the implementation verification component of our program provides us two different opportunities. First, to look back and get the record of everything that has occurred on the landscape in the last 2 years, and be able to do that assessment. The additional is looking forward about what is anticipated to occur and what is going to occur on the landscape in the next 2-year period, and make sure that we have the applicable BMPs in place, for that next period under the conditions of the law and associated regs.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question come in from Beth Albee, who asked, will there be tracking of nutrient exports off a parcel so as to accurately assess the nutrient balance? Inputs alone don't paint a detailed enough picture here.
We are, in terms of this rulemaking, that is an issue that has been discussed on a number of different levels. The manuals themselves do encourage, in many cases, a holistic look at, a nutrient budget. However, Senate Bill 712 is pretty explicit in what it is requiring, which is the aggregate amounts of pounds of nitrogen and phosphorus that are being applied, over and across BMAPs. That said, it's difficult within a BMAP context, and the way I have termed it is kind of looking at the universe through a pinhole. It is vital to understand, and this is why BMAPs are, I think, so complex. It's vital to understand the topography and hydrology of a BMAP holistically, and even within subbasins. It's vital to understand, not only nutrient application, but again, we talk about fate and transport all the time. We talk about, there's a lot of different things that leave the sites in terms of pallets of sod or crates of citrus, all of which have a nutrient value to them, because that's what plants are hungry. Nutrients feed the crop. So getting a holistic picture is we don't begrudge DEP their challenges, because it is a very complex exercise, which is why the BMAPs include not only BMPs, but also those regional projects and other pieces that we all try and pull the same direction in our canoe to be able to continue to make progress in the improvement of water quality within those basins.
Okay, that was the last question. Thank you, Chris.
Excellent. Well, if there are not other questions,
Wait, we just got another one as soon as I said that. This question is from Justin Jones, and they ask, since the requirement is to provide a total volume of nutrients applied, is there consideration for weather events that cause leaching, which may then require additional nutrients, such as nitrogen, to be applied that are currently above the recommended rates? What happens when the rates are exceeded justifiably?
Well, the compliance piece of the program is that which occurs under the auspices of the BMP manuals and the implementation verification visits pursuant to the operation of the OAWP programs. That would be, the conversation about those type of events and the way in which the various manuals are articulated and have been approved through DEP, would occur in the NOI context as we verify the proper implementation of BMPs, including nutrient management BMPs. Regardless, the nutrient application record form, again, is to look at that aggregate of nitrogen and phosphorus that's being applied across ultimately a basin or sub-basin, which again, the department and the districts and our office work collaboratively to look at various things that occur within that review framework tied to the BMAPs. And they do, keep in mind weather events that occurred within a given time frame, et cetera, in their regulatory duties. So I've tried to address it in both forms, but in terms of the manuals drive, the manuals have been approved. The manuals are the compliance and regulatory piece from the OAWP program. The record form is aggregating a total of nutrients that are being applied over a 2-year period within an NOI pursuant to the production that's taking place on that acreage.
Thank you. I think that you may go ahead, Chris.
Okay. We are at 10:21, and nobody likes to hear me talk. We would like to hear everybody else talk. I think that the next piece in the program, having walked through these documents, is again the ability to hear from everybody on the phone. We would love to hear any comments that you may have based on this presentation. We then, as noted, we're going to look for some written comments and kind of make a determination as to when the notice of proposed rule will be issued. So with that, I am going to thankfully mute myself for lots of people on the phone and turn it back over to you, Kathleen. And I'm sure that you've got a number of folks that would like to make some public comment. And last I heard, you've got a really cool 3-minute timer. So with that, let's take some public comment and kind of move from there.
Thank you, Chris. Everybody bear with me a little bit while I get everything set up as we switch over. Let's see. Okay, as Chris mentioned, we are now in our public comment period, and just a little housekeeping here. So to provide public comments, you have 2 options, as we mentioned earlier. You may raise your hand to speak, and I will unmute you, and then you can provide your comments. As a reminder, our workshop is being recorded. Or you may type your question or your comment in the question box, and then we will, note that we have received your public comment, and they will become part of the record. Or if you need to let me know in the question box that you want to speak rather than raise your hand, we can do that too. As Chris mentioned, we are going to be limited to 3 minutes for each commenter. And I will begin the public comment period. You will see, I will start the timer when you begin speaking, and then you'll see it count down. So with that, I will take, just organizing things a little bit on my desktop, so I'm sure I don't miss anybody. The first person that we have their hand raised is Mr. Ritchie. I will unmute you, Mr. Ritchie, and you may go ahead and speak. And when you speak, please restate your name and let us know who you represent. Thank you. We're having a hard time hearing you, Mr. Ritchie.
I don't intend to speak.
Oh, well, your hand is raised. Okay, that's fine. I can unraise your hand and put you back on mute. Thank you. Okay, the next person we have is John Paul or JP Brooker. I will unmute you, sir. Okay, and I'm getting a notice that you're self-muted, so go ahead, Mr.
Should be ready to go?
Yep, you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide comments on this rulemaking. I'm JP Brooker. I'm the Director of Florida Conservation for Ocean Conservancy, and I'm based in St. Petersburg. For those of you that are not familiar with Ocean Conservancy, we've worked in Florida for more than 30 years on marine conservation issues, including water quality and abundance, but also fisheries and marine and coastal habitat and wildlife conservation. We welcome the opportunity to work with the office and the department as these rules are being promulgated for Senate Bill 712, and we believe that Florida is at an all hands on deck moment when it comes to conserving our natural resources, and that this rulemaking presents a solid opportunity to enhance and improve Florida's water quality while also bolstering the economy. We offer these three recommendations on the rulemaking, which I've also laid out in more detail in the written comments that I've submitted to the department. 1, on effectiveness monitoring. Evidence of the effectiveness of this rule is important to the credibility of the agency and the efficacy of the program. We recommend that the rule establishes clearly how and how often monitoring will be conducted and how the agency will ensure sufficient capacity is dedicated to monitoring. 2, on the frequency of site visits, we believe increasing the frequency of site visits from biannually to annually will incentivize producers to implement best management practices with fewer potential lapses in compliance, resulting in a more impactful program. Providing adequate notice of the site visit should decrease the burden of more frequent visits on producers. And 3, on incentivizing participation, the agency has an opportunity to encourage producers to participate in the program by offering them greater visibility on its website, enabling buyers of agricultural products to buy preferentially from enrolled producers. The agency might also consider a certification label for enrolled producers that recognizes and rewards them for their environmental stewardship in the marketplace. Again, thanks for the opportunity to comment on this important rulemaking, and please do not hesitate to contact me if I can offer any assistance as rulemaking progresses.
Okay, thank you very much. And next we have Paul Gray, and I will unmute you, Mr. Gray. You are self-muted too, so you will need to unmute yourself. Paul Gray. Okay. Oh, he is told that his line cannot be unmuted. So let me try unmuting you again. Try again. Maybe that'll work. Okay, there. I see, Mr. Gray, you're ready to go.
Line cannot be unmuted.
Oh, there's a lot of feedback. Okay, I muted you. There's a lot of feedback. I don't know if you have the phone, the audio coming through a phone and a computer, but if you can mute one of those speakers, then you will be able to speak. I'll try again. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I still have a lot of feedback. Mr. Gray, we are really getting quite a bit of feedback. So I really am not sure what to do, but let's go to the next person and I'll see if I can figure out what's happening with Mr. Gray. Okay, the next person we have is Anna Upton, and I will unmute them. And go ahead, Anna.
Thank you. This is Anna Upton on behalf of the Everglades Foundation. The incorporation of an official enrollment process where the BMPs are selected and verified at the outset by DACs is a positive improvement to the program, and we're happy to see this. It is a little concerning that the annual survey option is being eliminated. The Ocean Conservancy noted that an annual inspection would provide more meaningful information. We agree with that, but if we're going to do inspection every other year, having that annual survey and that data from the years on which an inspection does not occur could be really valuable and helpful. In terms of the on-site inspection itself, the information that's on the NARF right now can be improved greatly. We think all applications to the land should be reported. I think one of the other people that had a question today noted the difference between how some people might classify something as a fertilizer, other people might just consider it a soil amendment. And I think we're really looking at all sources of nutrients. And so whether it's classified as a fertilizer, a soil amendment, or something else, it really shouldn't matter. So all applications should be reported. And we also think it's important to note the specific time and the specific amount, not just in a 6-month period or over a larger period of time, because as one of the other people who had a question noted, a rain event could come. And so we need to have not just the specific date, but also the amount of rainfall that occurs in a close proximity of time to the application of the nutrient, so we can see what's happening and why there may be over applications or why there might be a nutrient problem occurring in a specific area. And then lastly, the amount of time that's being allotted to allow people to come into compliance is really just unacceptable. We have a serious water quality problem right now, and especially in the Lake Okeechobee area, it's agricultural pollution that's contributing heavily to the loading that's going into the lake. And so what I'm reading in the draft rule looks like that people are allowed up to 4 years sometimes to come into compliance. That's 80% of a BMAP's timeframe. You know, BMAPs go on 5-year cycles, so there really needs to be a more reasonable amount of time to come into compliance. If you aren't willing to adjust the whole rule statewide to change those timeframes, maybe consider for enrollees that are under a BMAP that there should be a much shorter period of time to come into compliance, maybe something that does not exceed a year, since people are already supposed to be doing their their BMPs if they're within a BMAP. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's see, I don't see any, let's see, Rich Budell has his hand raised. I will unmute them. Go ahead, Rich. Rich, you are unmuted. You may go ahead. If you're speaking, Rich, we cannot hear you. Okay, I'm gonna come back to Mr. Budell later. Let's go to David Cullen. Oops. Go ahead, David. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Okay.
Maybe,
David?
I was gonna say maybe unmute, well, unmuting everybody may be a little bit of a framework, but we seem to be having a little bit of audio challenges. So let's just make sure we're trying to get everybody heard.
Yeah. David, you're showing up as unmuted on my screen here. So you may go ahead and speak. Okay. We'll come back to David.
Let's try a couple more. Yep, go ahead.
Wait, David, was that you?
Kathleen, this is Chris.
Okay.
Let's try a couple of more, and yeah, if we can figure this out, great. If not, we'll probably shift this to some written testimony unless we can get it straight. So why don't we try a couple more and then go back to Dr. Gray and Rich and David, because we'd like to get these comments on the record. Thank you.
Okay. So Matt Warren, I'm going to unmute you. You need to unmute yourself. Oh, wait. Let me unmute you again. Okay, Matt, please unmute yourself. Okay. Perhaps let me look here. I know things
Kathleen,
can be difficult
can we
if
try
you're calling.
Kathleen,
Go ahead.
can we unmute everyone and then see whether we can just call on folks, please?
Okay. All right. Here we go. I have unmuted. I've unmuted everybody, and you may.
Okay.
David, go right ahead. Or
All right. Can you hear me now? Test
I
1,
can
2.
hear you quite well.
Excellent. Okay. Where would we be without technology? Okay. 3 things very quickly. First of all, we think that the submission of the nutrient information should be in electronic format so that it can be uniform and easily aggregated, disaggregated, analyzed by DEP. Secondly, absolutely second Anna Upton's point about the amount of time that people are given to achieve compliance, particularly since in the area of the springs, they're not even going to be looked at in the coming year. So they're looking at probably at least 5 years before their time would expire to have achieved compliance with corrective measures. And then lastly, we are concerned about the overall aggregation of data. I cannot find authorization for aggregation in the underlying authorizing legislation. I went through it last night. It refers to the application, not the purchase. And I understand that the purchase was used previously as the evidence for what was being applied. And I can understand the rationale for that. But we need the specificity to be given to DEP so that they can aggregate it, disaggregate it, and analyze the information most effectively for their purposes, which are water quality. And we will expand on that in written commentary. But again, thank you for having this and for finally figuring out how to get me heard.
All right, Kathleen, who's next?
Okay, yeah, talking while muted. So thank you for your comments, David. Rich Budell, you may go ahead. So Rich, we cannot hear you. You were showing as unmuted. If you are calling in using, if you are participating using the computer audio, I think you can test your microphone. So if we're having problems hearing people, you can test your microphone if it's through the computer. If you are calling through your phone and we've unmuted you through the computer, you may also have inadvertently muted your own phone. Okay, I hear somebody ringing. So you may also need to unmute your phone through your phone's muting system and not just the GoToWebinar program. So Rich, okay. I do not hear Rich at all. And I don't see any other hands raised. We have had some comments written in the chat box.
Can we go back to Dr. Gray, please?
Let's see if I can find him. I know he was going to try and.
Can you hear me?
Going to. I can
Hello?
hear somebody. Yes.
Oh yeah, this is Paul Gray. Hi.
Yay! Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys. It's always a chore. We really think a great improvement in this is, it used to be when you signed a notice of intent, you automatically got the benefits of the BMP, which is presumption of compliance and legal protection. And all you'd done is signed a piece of paper, and you really hadn't, started your BMP program necessarily. So we think this is a great improvement, that now you have to have a site visit, and you actually got to get going on your BMPs before you get these really great benefits, because, that's gives you a lot when they give you a presumption and protection, and especially in the day of cyanobacteria, that's really important. So that's a great improvement, but we do have, as you've heard from other people, concerns about the time frame, because if DAX comes back in 2 years, and I know that's what the legislation said, and you haven't gotten up to snuff, the way this reads is it says DAX then identifies corrective measures, and then they come back 2 years later, and if you're still not up to snuff, then DAX will identify remedial measures, and then they come back 2 years later, so we're 6 years into this, and if you still haven't done your stuff, then that's when you might get referred to DEP. And so we think we're going to submit written comments too, but we think what DAC should do when they come out in the first 2 year visit is, if you're not up to snuff, they say, you've got to do this, and we're going to be back in 1 year. And if you come back in 1 year and the landowner hasn't gotten up to speed, it's been 3 years to get up to speed. So then we think it should be referred to DEP. So that's just to try to a little bit, especially when you think about these BMAP. The time frame for them is only 20 years. To have people, kind of with a 6-year lenience period is excessive to us. So we thank you for upgrading this and making sure that people are at least doing their BMPs before they get the presumption, and also in reference to collecting the information just on what people put out, that how much phosphorus and nitrogen they put out. That, as Beth's question alluded to, that's not real informative. And if someone puts out a whole bunch of stuff, but then they harvest a whole bunch of stuff and they drive it back out the gate in products, then they may not be having a nutrient problem. And so unless we know what they actually are taking off their property, knowing what they put on their property really has very limited utility for us. So if DAX could figure out how to get more information about what's shipped out compared to what's shipped in, it would be much more informative to us to try to work with different kinds of producers and manage their nutrients according to their characteristics. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm very glad that we were finally able to hear you. Okay, so we have Beth Alvey. I don't know why. And if Beth would like to go ahead and speak, go ahead.
Thank you, Kathleen. This is Beth Albee with Audubon, Florida, and thank you for the opportunity for providing comment. So in addition to what my colleague Paul just said, I just wanted to add one more thing. We are happy with the new definitions of enrollment and notice of intent, etc. We would also ask that you consider adding a definition for site visit. It remains yet undefined, what % of the property will be evaluated or inspected at each site visit. And so providing some level of specificity or detail with respect to that will be helpful. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So I still see Rich Budell, and it shows that you are unmuted, Rich. So let's see if we can get you. Go ahead and speak if you can. Rich.
Well, I think we may have to call it and leave it for written commentary. If we can get Rich on, great. And again, we've got a minute or two to go. So if you want to leave Rich unmuted, maybe if we don't have any other questions, mute everybody else again, and I'll go ahead and take back, and we can kind of spin this up, Kathleen.
Okay. Okay, so and let me just check my list to make sure we're not missing anybody with their hand raised. And I don't see anybody with their hand raised. And as a reminder, your comments that are received written through our chat boxes will become part of the record. So thank you for those who have submitted the written ones. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Kathleen. Appreciate everybody hanging on. And again, I apologize for the technical difficulties that arose. What we do want to do is go ahead and just kind of talk next steps, talk kind of where we're at. We appreciate everybody providing comments. We know that there were also comments in the question box, chat box that were submitted. Again, we appreciate those. this is being recorded, so you can we can make that available and go back to it. We look forward to the written comments based on a number of different factors. We at this point we're hoping to go ahead and see if we could get those comments, given that everybody has seemed so well prepared, by next Friday, the 13th, which seems I don't know, it's Florida. It seems an apt day to ask for comments. So if by close business Friday the 13th, you can get us comments. Again, those comments should be provided to Bill Bartnick. His email is on the screen. He is the contact on the notice of rule development as well. He will be your one-stop shop source. If there are additional thoughts, anything else, we ask you to kind of run through Bill, and again, look forward to getting all the comment. There have been a number of very good points raised and comments made, and again, we appreciate everybody's interest. The legislature in their wisdom provided some quality language, and we are looking to faithfully implement that as we continue to try and be more efficient, effective, and improve our regulatory program implementation. We have the website. Excuse me. This is where the rule materials will be located. This is where this presentation will be located. This is where we will be posting the public comment that is received. Upon going ahead and getting that comment, reviewing that comment, we are going to go ahead and move forward with the notice of proposed rule based on where that final landing spot, that final sweet spot is. And as Mr. James mentioned, we will then be back into the next step of that 120 process. And again, we appreciate everybody providing those comments and responding and helping us in what is intended and will be a very transparent, forward-looking governance of the state 120 process. So I appreciate everybody attending. I haven't heard Rich hop on. I did want to again highlight the great work that we've done in the office and continue to work to implement. Just in case you need to get in touch with me, as in all things, any errors or snafus are my responsibility, and anything that you would like to praise is the credit goes to my amazing staff and those folks that determinedly helped us in this office and in this department get to the right place in terms of a governance stance. So appreciate everybody attending. Again, apologies for the slight technical issues. I think we got to everybody except Mr. Goodell. Apologies for that, Rich. And again, we look forward to seeing everybody's written comments and continuing to move forward and make sure that this rule is quality as we get it implemented. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. And goodbye, everyone.